All right, welcome back to the deep dive. It is Monday, February 9th, 2026. And for this one, I think we should start with an image. I want you to just close your eyes for a second.
Unless you're driving.
Yes, please. Please don't close your eyes if you're driving. But for everyone else, just imagine a river.
And I'm guessing this is a metaphorical river, given the topic we have on the docket today.
A very metaphorical river.
Yeah.
And a very, very turbulent one. We are standing at the edge of what is probably the most famous body of water in modern political history, or at least the most famous metaphor for one.
I think I know where you're going with this.
I think you do. If you've paid any, and I mean any, attention to global economics or history in the last half-century, you've almost certainly heard the phrase, crossing the river by feeling the stones.
It's the quintessential Deng Xiaoping quote. I mean, it is the slogan that basically defined China's entire rise from the ashes and the chaos of the Cultural Revolution to the economic powerhouse we see today.
It's practically the brand slogan for the entire reform and opening up era.
It really is.
And it creates this vivid image, right, of careful, pragmatic progress. You don't just leap blindly into a torrent of water.
No, you'd be swept away.
You take a step, you put your foot down, you feel for the stone under the water. Is it slippery? Is it covered in moss? Is it actually solid enough to hold your weight?
And if it is, you shift your weight forward.
And if it's not, you pull back. You find another stone.
It implies a total lack of dogma. It's the opposite of ideology, really. It says, we don't have a perfect map of the future, so we have to discover the path as we go. It's all about survival and adaptation.
But here's the hook for today's deep dive, and this is where the analysis we're looking at gets really, really fascinating. Most people, when they hear that quote, they only think about the first half of the crossing.
Right. They think about the economic miracle.
Exactly. The journey from abject poverty to, prosperity. They think about Shenzhen, turning from this tiny, sleepy fishing village of maybe 30,000 people.
I mean, it was nothing.
Into a cyberpunk metropolis of 20 million people.
Which makes sense, because that was the part of the journey we could all see. It was visible. It was the industrialization phase. We watched it happen on the news for 40 years. We saw the skylines literally rise from the ground. We saw the high-speed rail networks stitch the country together.
Right. But today, we are digging into a really compelling piece of analysis from the blog Barackface. It's titled, "The Time for Political Reform in China." And the core argument of this piece is that we've all been so focused on that first half of the crossing that we've completely ignored the second half.
The source is basically arguing that the river isn't fully crossed yet.
Not even close.
Yeah.
The source posits that the first half of the river, that was the economic crossing. That was the transition from a planned, Maoist economy to a market economy. But the second half of the river, that's the deeper part.
Where the current is stronger.
The current is stronger, the water's up to your neck. That's the political crossing. And that part, the author argues, has been postponed for nearly 50 years.
And the central thesis here is that the postponement is now officially over. The wait-and-see period has expired. The luxury of delay, it's gone.
Because of the date on the calendar.
Because of the date. It is February 2026. We are not in 1990 anymore. We are not even in 2010. China is no longer some developing nation trying to play catch-up.
It's an economic superpower.
It is. But more importantly, it's facing a technological disruption, we're talking AI and robotics, that threatens to break the very model that got it to this point.
So the mission for today is, it's pretty clear. We need to try and answer a massive question. Can a system that was built for industrial catch-up, a system designed to manage factory floors and export quotas and massive labor mobilization, can that system survive the transition to an AI-driven post-labor economy without fundamentally changing how it governs?
That is the question of the decade. I mean, it might be the question of the century for the Chinese Communist Party. Can the hardware of the state handle the software update of the economy?
Or does the hardware just crash? I love that analogy. And before we really get into the AI disruption, which is where this gets, frankly, a little sci-fi and philosophical, we have to go back to the beginning.
We have to understand the foundation.
We have to understand the grand bargain that Deng Xiaoping made.
We have to go back to the architect himself.
Let's unpack Deng, because I think in the West there's this tendency to simplify him. We either see him as a closet capitalist who, loved markets and hated Maoism.
Or as the tyrant who ordered the crackdown in 1989.
Right, it's very binary. But the source paints him as something much more specific, and I think much more interesting, a pragmatist.
Absolutely. The source makes a very, very strong distinction here. Deng wasn't a Democrat, not in any Western sense of the word, obviously. But he wasn't an ideologue either. He was obsessed with results. His whole philosophy was about the sequence.
The sequence. That sounds like a Robert Ludlum novel or something. The Deng sequence.
It does, doesn't it? But for Deng, it was the algorithm for national survival. He believed that reform had to happen in a very, very specific order. Step one, build prosperity. That's your economic engine.
Get people fed. Get money in their pockets.
Exactly. Then and only then do you move to step two, adjust power.
Yeah.
That's the political reform. He was absolutely convinced you couldn't do step two until step one was rock solid.
Okay, so why? Why was he so convinced of that? Why couldn't you do both at the same time? I mean, why not let people vote and get rich simultaneously?
Because he was looking across the border, he was looking at the anti-model, he was watching the Soviet Union.
The ghost of Christmas past. Or,
Yeah.
I guess, the ghost of Christmas present for him at that time.
Exactly. We often forget how closely Beijing was watching Moscow in the late 80s and early 90s. It was an obsession. Deng looked at Mikhail Gorbachev, and he saw a man who got the sequence completely, catastrophically wrong.
And the source spends a good amount of time analyzing this, Deng's view of Gorbachev. Which is so interesting because, in the West, we loved Gorbachev. We gave him a Nobel Peace Prize. He was the hero of the story for us.
The West loved him because he was opening things up. He was doing glasnost political openness and perestroika economic restructuring at the same time. Or really, the source argues he was pushing the politics much faster than the economics.
He was letting people speak their minds.
He was letting the press criticize the government, letting the satellite states have more autonomy, all of that.
And Deng looked at all of that and basically said, you are out of your mind.
Effectively, yes. The source uses this really vivid metaphor for it. It says, Deng believed Gorbachev was tearing down the scaffolding before the building could stand.
Wow. Okay, that paints a picture. Let's stay with that for a second. So the building is the economy, right? That's the actual structure.
That's the actual structure that keeps people fed and housed and employed, yes.
And the scaffolding is what? The authoritarian control. The party's grip on power.
That's it. It's the steel frame of the state that holds everything together while it's being built. And if you tear down that scaffolding, if you open up the political system, if you invite criticism and dissent before the building is finished, before the grocery store shelves are full,
then what happens?
then that dissent doesn't turn into some constructive, healthy debate. It turns into revolution. It turns into total collapse.
Because people use their new freedom to say, hey, we're still hungry.
And hey, this entire system is garbage.
Deng's analysis, according to the source, was that the Soviet Union didn't collapse just because it reformed. It collapsed because it reformed out of sequence. It dissolved its own authority much faster than it could build new, stable institutions to replace it.
So the lesson Deng took away from that was crystal clear. Do not be Gorbachev. Do not take the scaffolding down until the concrete is absolutely dry.
Precisely. Which is why China chose the exact opposite path. The path of the grand bargain.
Keep the politics locked down tight. An iron grip. But unleash the markets. And that's what they did. Starting in 1978, they decollectivized agriculture. This was, you can't overstate how huge this was. It basically meant telling farmers, look, if you grow extra grain, you can keep it and you can sell it. You don't have to give every last bit to the commune.
Which seems so fundamentally basic to us, but it was revolutionary and, in a Maoist sense, counter-revolutionary at the time.
Oh, it was a massive shift. Then they opened up those special economic zones. They invited foreign capital to come in. They basically said, we will let the market handle efficiency. We will let prices be determined by supply and demand, but the party will handle authority. The party will handle stability.
And if you just look at the scoreboard, nearly 50 years later, it's very hard to argue with the results of that first phase.
You really can't. The numbers are staggering. Hundreds of millions of people lifted out of poverty, the creation of the world's largest manufacturing base, the rise to become the #2 global economy. You have cities that literally did not exist 40 years ago that are now bigger and more modern than London or New York.
It was an unprecedented success in human history. But here's the catch, and this is really the crux of the source's entire argument. Deng never intended for this to be the permanent state of affairs.
This is the aha moment in the article, because we look at China today and we just assume, okay, this hybrid authoritarian capitalist thing, this is the Chinese model, this is what they want forever.
But the source argues that the lack of political reform wasn't some deep ideological refusal. It wasn't a no, never. It was a strategic postponement.
Political reform was delayed, not denied. That is the key phrase from the source. Deng's thinking was, let's get rich first, let's stabilize society, let's educate the population, and then, once we're on solid ground, we can figure out how to distribute power. Then we can figure out what a Chinese-style democracy might look like.
The problem, of course, is that once you've held on to power that tightly for 50 years, it becomes very, very difficult to let go, even if the original blueprint called for it.
The muscles have stiffened in that position.
Exactly. And institutions that are built solely for control eventually forget how to do anything else.
Right.
So we've established the history. China built this hybrid engine, capitalist pistons, but with an authoritarian steering wheel. And they gave it a name. They called it socialism with Chinese characteristics.
A phrase we hear constantly, and usually in the West, we just kind of dismiss it as propaganda fluff, you know?
Right. Oh, that's just what they say to pretend they're still communists while they're all driving Ferraris.
It feels like a branding exercise. But the source actually takes it seriously and breaks down what it means in an operational sense. And the definition they give is actually really, really helpful.
What is it?
The source defines socialism with Chinese characteristics as a system where capital may operate, but it must not rule.
Capital may operate, but it must not rule. Okay. That is a fascinating distinction, especially when you compare it to, well, to Western liberal democracies.
Let's dig into that for a second. Because in the US or in Europe, we struggle constantly with the influence of money in politics. It's arguably the defining struggle of our political age.
Oh, absolutely. Lobbying, campaign finance, super PACs, the revolving door between government regulators and the corporations they're supposed to be regulating. There is this persistent feeling in the West that if you have enough money, you can buy the law, or at least you can rent it for a while.
Right. We worry about state capture, this idea that the billionaires and the massive corporations capture the government. The source argues that China's model was specifically designed to solve that problem. They built a firewall.
A firewall between money and political power.
Yes. In China, you can make billions of dollars. You can become incredibly successful. You can be on the cover of Forbes magazine, but you cannot buy the state. The party always sits above capital. Always.
We have certainly seen some pretty vivid demonstrations of that in the last few years, especially with the crackdowns on the big tech billionaires.
Jack Ma is the classic textbook example here. In 2020, he was the undisputed face of Chinese capitalism, the most famous, most recognizable entrepreneur in the entire country. And he gives this speech in Shanghai, where he criticizes the state financial regulators, basically calling them out-of-touch pawn shop owners.
And in the West, that would just be a Tuesday. A billionaire criticizing the government is completely normal.
In the West, he might have been invited to testify before Congress or given a regular column in the Wall Street Journal. In China, the IPO of his company, Ant Group, which was set to be the biggest in history, was canceled within days. He disappeared from public view for months. His companies were forcibly restructured.
It was a very clear, very public demonstration. You can be Jack Ma, but you are not bigger than the party.
Correct. And the source is very clear on this. During the industrial catch-up phase, that model worked extraordinarily well.
Why? Why is that specific model better for that catch-up phase?
Because you could direct capital exactly where the state needed it to go. If the 5-year plan says we need high-speed rail to every province, they can just do it. They don't have to fight 1,000 lawsuits from landowners. They don't have to lobby for funding against a dozen other special interests.
There's no gridlock.
Zero gridlock. If the party says we need 5G coverage everywhere, the state-owned telcos just go out and build it. It allows for these massive, coordinated, nation-building infrastructure projects that democracies really struggle with.
It's efficient. Brutally efficient.
But, and there is always a but in this story,
the terrain is shifting.
the whole world is shifting under their feet.
Yeah.
What worked for building steel mills and export zones is now facing a massive existential threat. And that threat is the date we started with. It's 2026.
It's the AI disruption.
Exactly.
And this brings us to section 3 of the analysis. And this is where the whole conversation really turns, because this isn't just about robots taking jobs, though that is a huge part of it. The source argues this is actually a deep theoretical crisis for the Communist Party, a crisis of Marxism itself.
This is where we have to, put on our philosophy hats for a moment. It gets a little deep, but it's absolutely crucial to understanding why the current system might be about to break.
Okay, lay it on me. I haven't read Das Kapital since my sophomore year elective, but I'm ready.
All right, simple version. Classical Marxist theory, and this is, the ideology the CCP is theoretically founded on, even if they've, let's heavily modified it over the years.
Right.
It all rests on something called the labor theory of value.
Okay. Break that down for me.
The core idea is that all economic value comes from human labor, period. So let's take a chair. You have a pile of wood. By itself, it's worth, say, $10.
Right.
A worker comes along, they use their skill, they cut it, they sand it, they nail it together. Now it's a chair, and it's worth $100.
Okay, that makes sense.
The question Marxism asks is, where did that extra $90 of value come from? And the answer is, it came from the worker. It came from their time, their muscle, their skill. It's their life force, crystallized into an object.
Right. And the capitalist is the villain in this story because he sells the chair for $100, pays the worker maybe $10 for their time, and then keeps the extra $80 of profit for himself. He's exploiting the value created by the labor.
Exactly. The moral weight of the entire system, the entire ideology, is on the worker. The worker is the source of all value. The worker is the protagonist of history. Workers of the world, unite. The hammer and the sickle on the flag, they represent industrial and agricultural labor.
But what happens when the worker isn't making the chair anymore?
That is the crisis.
Right.
What happens in 2026 when a robot arm is making the chair? And an AI designed the chair? And an autonomous truck delivered the wood for the chair?
Then the value isn't coming from human labor anymore.
No, not at all. It's coming from capital. It's coming from the machines and the algorithms and the code.
So if the machines do more and more of the work, the value of human labor
Plummets. In some sectors, it approaches zero. And this just completely destabilizes the entire theoretical framework of a communist party. If the worker is no longer the primary source of value, then what is the point of the revolution? Who are you even represented anymore?
Okay, that is a huge philosophical problem. But there's also a very real, tangible, on-the-ground economic problem that comes with it.
Oh, absolutely. The philosophical problem is for the theorists in Beijing. The economic problem is for everyone. The reality in 2026 is that automation is displacing routine labor everywhere, in every country, but China is ground zero.
Because it's the factory of the world.
Right.
So it's going to be hit the hardest.
They're at the epicenter. If you have 1.5 billion people and your entire economic model for 40 years was based on manufacturing, and suddenly manufacturing doesn't need nearly as many people, you have a massive, massive problem on your hands.
The source talks about this, that entire regions, the old industrial belts in the Northeast, for example, are facing shrinking employment bases, while the high-skilled tech sectors in places like Beijing and Shenzhen are winning big.
It creates this widening inequality gap that's much harder to solve than the old one. In the past, to fix inequality, you could just move a peasant from a rice paddy in the countryside to an assembly line in a sneaker factory. Boom, their income triples overnight.
That was the low-hanging fruit of development. It required very little training.
It was straightforward. But you can't just take a factory worker who lost his job to a robot and move him into an AI research lab in Shanghai.
No. The skills gap is a chasm.
You can't bridge that with a bus ticket. You need a PhD and 10 years of experience.
Which leads directly to what the source calls the legitimacy problem. Let's talk about that social contract again. Because for the average person on the street in Shanghai or Chengdu, it hasn't really been about Marxism for a long, long time, has it?
No. Practically speaking, the social contract, the grand bargain, has been this. We, the party, provide you with growth. We provide you with jobs. We make sure your life is better than your parents' life was. In exchange, you provide us with loyalty and you don't ask for political power.
It's performance-based legitimacy.
Precisely. The legitimacy comes from the results. Look at the scoreboard. But in 2026, if the scoreboard says unemployed due to automation, then the deal is off. The contract is broken.
There's a quote in the source that really, really stuck with me on this. It says, "Growth alone is no longer sufficient. When machines do more work than humans, the social contract must evolve."
That is the pivotal point of the entire article. You can't just manage the economy with the old tools anymore. You have to adapt the politics. Because if you have a huge population of people who are economically displaced by your own technological success, you have a perfect recipe for social instability.
And the source is careful to emphasize that China isn't blind to this technological shift. They're not ignoring AI.
Oh, not at all. They're doing the opposite. They're doubling down on it. The government is pushing for high-quality development. They want to lead the world in AI. They see it as the future of national power.
And they know they have to automate, too, because their population is aging so rapidly. They need the robots to take care of the elderly and do the jobs that younger people won't be there to do.
All true. They are embracing the technology, but the source argues they might be ignoring the political consequences of that technology. Or rather, they're trying to manage those consequences with the old toolkit.
The hammer toolkit, control and command.
Right. Which brings us to Section 4 of the analysis. The wrong kind of reform. Or, as the author calls it, the inward turn.
Yeah. The source notes that since around the year 2000, and especially in the last decade under the current leadership, China has been reforming. It's not like they've just been sitting on their hands doing nothing.
No, there's been a ton of reform, but it's all been in a very, very specific direction.
The source calls it the 3 Cs.
Capacity, control, and cohesion.
And what's not on that list is democratization.
Definitely not. The reforms have all been about making the authoritarian system more efficient, not more open. They're trying to build a better, more responsive, more powerful authoritarianism.
So let's break down the specific trends the source identifies here. Because when you list them all out, it really does paint a picture of a tightening vice. First up, institutional consolidation.
This is about merging the party and the state functions. You know, back in the 90s, there was a bit of an attempt to separate them. You had the government, which ran the utilities and the roads, and then you had the party, which set the ideology.
And now
Now that line is basically gone. They've merged them to kill any ambiguity. The party leads everything, and it says so explicitly.
Okay, second trend, the anti-corruption drive.
Which has been absolutely massive. Millions of officials have been disciplined. They call it catching tigers and flies, both high-level and low-level officials.
And on one level, the public really likes that, because corruption was a huge endemic problem. You had local officials eating these lavish banquet dinners and wearing Rolex watches while the local roads were full of potholes.
That's true, it was popular. But the source argues it was also a powerful tool for centralization. It disciplined the bureaucracy, yes, but it also terrified them. If you're a local official now, you are scared to do anything innovative or anything that hasn't been explicitly approved from above because you might get investigated. It freezes initiative at the local level.
Third on the list, ideological tightening.
This is everything from education and the media to surveillance. We're all familiar with the Great Firewall, but this goes much deeper. It's about ensuring a singular, unified narrative across the entire country. You have Xi Jinping thought being taught in schools from a young age. It's all about cohesion, making sure 1.4 billion people are, as much as possible, thinking the same way.
And finally, legal codification, which means actually writing the party's leadership into the law itself.
Right, making it literally illegal to challenge the party's monopoly on power.
So you look at all this, and one reaction could be, well, they are reforming. They're making the state stronger. They're getting ready for the coming storm. But the source argues there's a very heavy cost to this kind of hyper-centralized control.
It's the classic trade-off between stability and flexibility. By centralizing everything, you gain immense power to direct the country. As we said, you can build high-speed rail networks overnight. You can pivot the entire economy to green energy faster than anyone else because you can just order it to happen.
But what do you lose in that process?
You lose what the source calls internal pluralism.
Internal pluralism. That's an interesting term. What does it mean?
It means having different voices, different perspectives within the room where decisions are made. Collective leadership, which was the norm for a while, has given way to personal authority. And when everyone is afraid to speak up because of the anti-corruption purges or the ideological strictness, you get a yes-man culture.
And this is where it connects back to what the source calls the complex society argument. This is the systems theory part of the article.
It's a crucial point. If you are running a very simple system, let's say a single factory, you can run it effectively by shouting orders from the top, make more widgets. And everyone on the factory floor makes more widgets. Simple.
But China, in 2026, is not a single factory.
No, it's a modern civilization of 1.4 billion people. It is urban, it is sophisticated, it is globally connected, and it is mind-bogglingly complex. And basic systems theory tells us that complex systems absolutely need feedback loops to survive.
You need to know when things are going wrong at the local level before they blow up and become a national crisis.
Exactly. If you're running a complex society, you need to know, is this new tax policy accidentally bankrupting small businesses in Chengdu? Is the new education reform causing a mental health crisis among students in Shanghai? Is the AI displacement causing unrest and riots in the factory towns of Dongguan?
And if you kill all the feedback loops, if you silence the journalists, the local officials who might raise an alarm, the academics, the social media posters who complain, then you are flying blind.
You are flying blind directly into a storm. And 2026 is a storm. Innovation especially thrives on debate and disagreement. You cannot run a post-industrial, AI-driven society through mobilization. You can't just order people to be innovative, and you certainly can't order people to be happy when their jobs are being automated away.
So the source argues that the very basis of legitimacy is shifting. It's no longer just about delivering economic results, it's about participation and fairness.
Exactly. People need to feel like they have some say in how these massive changes are affecting them, especially when the changes like AI job displacement are really, really scary. If I lose my job to an algorithm, I don't want to just be told it's for the good of the nation. I want to have a voice in how the social safety net is designed to catch me.
Okay, so we've clearly defined the problem. The old economic model is hitting a wall. The current inward-looking reforms are making the system too rigid. So what is the solution? What does Deng Scale Reform 2.0 actually look like, according to the source?
Well, first, the author includes a very important disclaimer, and this is vital to understand. The source is not calling for Western-style multi-party democracy.
Right. This isn't a call for China to have a one-person, one-vote system for a president or a system with Democrats and Republicans screaming at each other on cable news all day.
Deng himself rejected that model. The current leadership obviously rejects it, and frankly, the source argues that simply trying to copy-paste the Western model onto China's unique context might not even work. It could be incredibly chaotic. It could lead to the kind of polarization and gridlock that China desperately wants to avoid.
So the goal here is, what's the phrase, transformative without being destabilizing.
Exactly. It's about evolution, not revolution. They want to upgrade the operating system without crashing the entire computer.
So if it's not Western democracy, then what is it? The source outlines 5 specific pillars for this reform. Let's walk through them one by one because this is really the blueprint being proposed. Pillar number 1, reviving intra-party democracy.
This is all about fixing the internal engine of the CCP itself. It means creating space for real, genuine deliberation inside the party.
How does that actually work in practice? What would that look like?
It would mean things like competitive internal appointments. So imagine you have an opening for the party secretary of a major city like Guangzhou. Instead of just having a loyalist appointed from the top down in Beijing, you might have 2 or 3 qualified candidates.
And they would have to compete.
Yes, they'd have to present their plans, debate their policies, and then the senior party members in that city would actually vote to select the best candidate.
So it's a form of democracy, but it's contained within the elite, within the party.
Exactly. It's still a one-party state, but the party itself becomes a more democratic and meritocratic mechanism. And it also means restoring term norms, making sure people cycle out of top positions so fresh blood and new ideas can come in.
And why does this help solve the bigger problem?
It directly addresses the rigidity problem. It prevents the emperor has no clothes syndrome. If you have real internal competition, bad ideas get filtered out and challenged before they become disastrous national policy. It brings that crucial feedback loop back inside the room. It encourages meritocracy over pure loyalty.
Okay, pillar number 2, strengthening the rule of law.
This is the big one, especially for business and innovation. It means reducing arbitrary power.
We talked about the entrepreneur in Shanghai, Jack Ma.
Right. If you're a tech entrepreneur, you are, by definition, taking a risk. You're investing money, hiring people, trying something completely new. To do that, you need to know that the rules of the game won't just change overnight because a local official woke up on the wrong side of the bed.
You need predictability.
You need predictability. You need to know that if you get into a contract dispute, the court will decide the case based on the law, not based on who has better political connections or Guangxi. You need what's called procedural justice.
It's about the party binding its own hands in a way.
That's a great way to put it. The source argues the party must bind its own hands with the law to unleash the full innovative potential of the people. People just don't take big risks if they fear arbitrary punishment.
Pillar number 3, institutionalizing anti-corruption.
And note that specific word, institutionalizing. The source stresses the need to move from campaigns to systems.
What's the fundamental difference between a campaign and a system?
A campaign is a purge. It's top-down, it's terrifying, it's unpredictable, and it depends entirely on the will of the leader. The leader is angry about corruption, so heads will roll. It creates a temporary fix out of fear, but the corruption often grows back once the campaign ends.
And a system.
A system is about building permanent checks and balances. It's about independent auditing bodies. It's about financial transparency. It's about having something like an independent commission against corruption, like they have in Hong Kong or Singapore, that has the real power to investigate anyone, even the friends of the top leaders.
So campaigns create fear, but systems create trust.
That is it. Perfectly put. And in a complex, modern economy, you need trust more than you need fear. You can't run a $20 trillion economy on fear alone. You need people to trust that the system itself is fair.
All right, pillar number 4, expanding consultative governance.
This is the direct answer to that feedback problem we were talking about. It means scaling up things that already exist in China, like village elections, holding more public hearings on new policies, and creating real institutionalized mechanisms for policy feedback.
It's interesting, the source points out that China actually has had village-level elections for a long time.
They do, and for a while they were quite vibrant. The source suggests scaling that model up, maybe to the township level, perhaps eventually to the city level. Let people have a say on local issues. Let them vent their frustrations through the ballot box locally where it's manageable.
So it's about asking people what they think before you build the dam or before you change the local retirement age.
Exactly. It's not about letting them vote for the president, but it is about letting them have a meaningful voice in the decisions that directly affect their daily lives. If you're going to disrupt an entire community by building a new AI data center, hold a hearing. Let the people vent, listen to their concerns, maybe modify the plan based on their feedback.
It's a pressure release valve. It prevents the pressure cooker from just exploding.
Right. It starts to treat citizens as stakeholders in the project of governance, not just as subjects to be governed.
And finally, pillar number 5, which I think is the most 2026 of all of them, redefining socialist equity.
This is the direct, explicit response to the AI crisis. If machines and algorithms are taking the jobs, how do you distribute the immense wealth they create?
The source calls for things like robust social safety nets, universal reskilling programs, and income stabilization.
Basically, if the labor theory of value is broken, you need to invent a new social equity theory of distribution.
That's a mouthful.
It is. But the concept is pretty simple. You have to find a way to disconnect human survival from traditional wage labor. If the robots are generating the wealth, the state needs a powerful mechanism to ensure that wealth doesn't just stick to the top 1%, the people who own the robots.
And this is what socialism in the age of AI has to mean, right?
The source argues it's the only thing it can mean. If you are the Communist Party, you cannot allow a situation where a handful of tech oligarchs own everything and the masses of former workers starve because their labor is no longer needed. That is the end of the party. That is the end of their legitimacy. So they have to build a radical new safety net. Maybe it's a universal basic income. Maybe it's a social dividend paying out to every citizen from the profits of the big AI companies.
And the source's overall argument is that doing these 5 things is about future-proofing the CCP.
That's the ultimate argument. These reforms don't weaken the party, they save it. They
Yeah.
save it from becoming brittle and out of touch. They save it from a Soviet-style collapse where the pressure just builds and builds in secret until the whole thing explodes unexpectedly.
It's a surprisingly optimistic view in a way. It assumes the party is actually capable of this kind of deep self-reflection and change.
Well, that brings us to the philosophy of evolution, which is the final section. The source highlights another one of Deng Xiaoping's key insights. Systems, not heroes, sustain progress.
I love that line, because we tend to obsess over individual leaders. Who's the chairman? Who's the president? But Deng realized that even a great leader eventually dies or retires. A great system can last for centuries.
Deng was extremely wary of the cult of personality after living through the chaos of the Mao era. He saw firsthand what happens when one man has absolute unchecked power. He knew that relying on one great man was incredibly dangerous. Because what if the great man makes a terrible mistake? What if he gets old and loses touch with reality?
So the application of that idea here in 2026 is that China doesn't need to wait for some new charismatic savior to appear.
No, they don't need a Chinese Gorbachev or a new Deng. The source argues the CCP has the organizational capacity, the talent, the bureaucracy to do this right now collectively if they simply choose to. They have the resources, they have the smarts, they just need the political will.
But the clock is ticking.
It is. The fundamental danger is delay. The source warns that if this kind of reform waits too long, the system becomes too rigid. social trust thins out. And once trust is gone, reform itself becomes incredibly dangerous.
That's the Gorbachev trap all over again. You have to reform while you are still strong and have the public's trust, not when you're desperate.
Exactly. If you wait until the crisis has already hit, until unemployment is at 30% and people are in the streets protesting, then any attempt to open up just leads to collapse. You have to fix the roof while the sun is shining, not when the hurricane is already blowing the shingles off.
The transition from a growth-driven power to a governance-mature civilization is a pretty lofty goal.
It is. But it's the difference between a country that is just getting rich and a country that is truly stable and developed for the long haul. It's a difference between an adolescent growth spurt and real adult maturity.
So, let's circle all the way back to where we started this conversation, the river.
A river.
Horse the river by feeling the stones. We are looking at a China that is now standing on the far bank of poverty. They made it across. They survived that first treacherous half of the crossing.
They're drying themselves off on the riverbank. They're checking their pockets. They are rich. They have built the cities. They've built the factories. The mission was accomplished.
But now they lift their eyes, and they're staring at a completely new terrain. The AI era. And the stones in the river ahead. They're not economic stones anymore. They're political stones.
And the source's final argument is that those stones are solid, but they must be stepped on. You can't just stand on the bank forever and admire your past accomplishments.
You have to keep moving. Because stagnation in this era is death.
Especially with the sheer speed of technological change. If you stand still in 2026, you are actually moving backward relative to the technology.
So let's try to summarize the key takeaways for you, our listeners, today. We covered a huge amount of ground.
We certainly did.
First, the economic reform part is done. The easy part, relatively speaking, is over. Political reform is the missing, postponed half of Deng's original vision.
Second, AI and robotics are making that old social contract growth equals legitimacy obsolete. You cannot buy loyalty with jobs if the jobs don't exist anymore. The labor theory of value is being retired by robots.
And third, reform doesn't have to mean becoming America. It doesn't mean westernization. In this context, it means building internal feedback loops, strengthening the rule of law, and creating a new kind of social equity for the 21st century.
It means becoming a more mature, more resilient version of itself, upgrading the OS from version 1.0 to 2.0.
Now, here is the provocative thought that I want to leave everyone with to chew on. The source, as we've said, suggests that the CCP can self-correct because, at its core, it's a pragmatic organization. That is the hope here.
That is the optimistic path, the path where reason and foresight prevail over fear.
But history? Well, history is a tough teacher.
It is indeed.
Can a system that is built on centralized control, a system that has spent the last 10 years systematically tightening that control, can it ever voluntarily loosen its own grip before a crisis forces it to? We have seen very, very few examples of that in human history. Usually power holds on until its fingers are pried off one by one.
It is the ultimate test of that grand bargain. Can the creators of this incredibly successful system be wise enough to rewrite their own source code before it becomes obsolete?
Or is the grand bargain destined to be broken by the very technology AI that China now seeks to master? Is the robot the one thing that finally forces the hand of the party?
That is the question that 2026 is posing to the world, and we do not have the answer yet.
And we will definitely be watching to see how they answer it. Is this going to be a fascinating and critical couple of years ahead?
Couldn't agree more. A critical time.
Thanks for diving in with us. This was a heavy one, but I think an absolutely essential one for understanding where the world is headed.
It was a pleasure, as always.
We'll see you next time on The Deep Dive. And in the meantime, keep feeling for those stones.